So, welcome to A New Human Story. We are talking to people who are co creating a more heart centered and harmonious world. And today I'm very excited to be talking with Jamie Miller, who's Canada's leading biomimicrist. Welcome, Jamie. Jamie's
Hello.
mission is to connect to the genius of nature so that we can do it better naturally. So, Jamie, I just realized that it was about a year ago today or this month that we did the biomimicry weekend excursion. Was it?
Yeah.
In the fall, right?
Yes, it was late October.
Wow, that was such an amazing experience. I definitely didn't know what I was signing up for, but this 24-hour immersion into reconnecting with the language of nature again was just was spectacular, right? Like,
Yeah. I'm so happy, yeah, you enjoyed it, and I feel a little bit strange that we with COVID this year, that we weren't able to run more of them,
mhm.
but I'm looking forward to figuring out how we can adapt to keep those things going.
Yeah, it is amazing. Like it happened right before this whole lockdown happened, right? And
Yep.
so just such a contrast of having this like totally freeing weekend experience of just being like at one with nature and understanding and speaking the language and getting to know people in a heart-centered way and having these open fluid conversations and then to our reality now it's just it's
Yeah, totally.
definitely a big difference. So with that, maybe if you could start by telling us what biomimicry is anyway, because I think people are asking that question.
Yeah, by definition, biomimicry is innovation that is inspired by nature. And the most classic example is velcro, which was inspired by burs. A Swiss engineer in the 40s got fed up with burs sticking to his dog, and he took it under a microscope to see those hooking mechanisms and copied that to make velcro, which is one of the most successful adhesives we've made. Another good example is emulating humpback whale fins. A company called Whale Power made a much more efficient wind turbine blade, copying these bumps that are on the front edge of the whale fin. And they found that that wind turbine blade runs at 20% greater efficiency with slower wind speeds, and it's a lot quieter. And so biomimicry is essentially just recognizing that nature's been doing design. It does design, it's been doing it for billions of years. And biomimicry is a lens for us to view the natural world in that way. And so we can learn how to be more sustainable, how to be more resilient, how to build better communities and ecosystems, how to create new forms, how to inspire new processes, um, all in the effort to be more in harmony with nature.
Yeah, I think that's amazing because oftentimes people say, okay, we want to do it better. We want to be
Mhm.
more sustainable, but we don't know how, and how do we figure that out, right? And
Mhm.
here we have all around us and in front of us this incredible genius and
Yeah.
intelligence that which we're also built with, by the way, right? As well, like I
Yes.
think that's one thing that we forget is that because we are part of nature, that genius also exists somewhere within us, right?
Totally. And I think a lot of my students, I used to teach at OCAD, and when such an urban environment, one of the complaints was we don't have access to these, beautiful ecosystems or intact ecosystems like, people would do in other areas. But I mean, I'd ask them to look at their body, which is an incredible design, and you've got access to all sorts of inspiration. And I think what you're saying as well is like, yes, we are natural. We are connected to that natural, that genius. And so how do we tap into it? And that's part of the great challenge with biomimicry is that it's learning the language for how to speak to nature in a way that, could create and inspire new things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, with that, how do you speak to nature? I mean, how did you learn to, how do you relearn that language? I think I was blessed to be at a sweat lodge a number of years ago out in BC with some elders, and it was so amazing. And one thing that they said to me is I was still early on learning about biomimicry and all these amazing things, and they said, we used to speak the language of nature and it's in us, we just forgot, and so we
Mhm.
need to start to remember how to speak that language again, and it's within reach. And he was like, the birds want to play with us, they want to communicate with us, the trees want to talk to us, and we're just kind of, we're missing out on the fun, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, it's a good point. We have an indigenous elder on our board, and when I told her what we did, she says, "Well, we've been doing biomimicry for thousands of years." And I think it's important to remember that biomimicry is a new term, but it's not a new idea. And we have been in our history communicating with nature. I mean, part of why I love camping so much is because you're reconnecting to the natural world. You could be messed up by it if you're not paying attention. if you winter camp and you're not aware of the dangers, the cold, if you're not taking it seriously, you can get really you can get really hurt and potentially die. And that's what I love is, so the first part of how do you communicate with nature is that you regain your senses again. And I think being in the outdoors, you don't just use your eyes. You've got to be paying attention. You've got to be really present.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what I love about the outdoors, and that's what I love about the extreme outdoors, like whitewater paddling, or when you're in a rainstorm, you feel alive and you feel so much more present because there's an element of risk and danger. And so, to me, that's the first part in learning to communicate with nature, is to be present to it. And being present to it could be in a lot of different ways, whether it's meditation or you're mountain biking or you're just, looking at a leaf. Um, the other thing, the next step is really about dropping your preconceived ideas. Something we talk about in our course is that we have to reimagine the world through a 5-year-old lens. So go back to those questions that you used to ask your parents about how does everything do everything? How does a cat jump so high? How does an ant carry so much load? That curiosity is the kind of the epicenter of reconnecting with nature and learning how to speak its languages. You've got to ask questions, and then the more time you spend with it, solutions will eventually reveal themselves.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I mean, I go out for walks and I could pass a certain spot 1,000 times, and then the next time, it's every time I see more. Like there's just always more
Totally.
there,
Yeah.
and something I'm like, was that really there? Like, was that
Yeah.
rock really there? Was that moss really growing in that direction? Like, I didn't see that yesterday. And it's just amazing that as you start to open up to more senses, you
Yeah.
start to see more. Like, there just
Totally.
really is more to see and more experience. And that's really been, my experience being out on the land with, some of our indigenous partners, like you said. It's like, they just see more, right?
Yeah.
Their experience is bigger. So when you take something like that, and you start from the premise that you need to be able to really connect to all your senses because there's potential danger. And I know I was,
Mhm.
in the Amazon a couple years ago, I was with this indigenous leader, and he was like, okay, stop, how many sounds and smells can you identify? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like three. And he's
Yeah.
like, as kids, because I'm coming from the city of Toronto, so it's like, and we're not conditioned to that. But he was saying,
Yeah.
as kids, they had to identify up to 5, 10,000, because, like you said, you have to be so aware because there's danger lurking around every corner. You could get attacked by a puma or bitten by a
Right.
poisonous snake, or you need to be so attuned to those senses and so present. And so I thought that was fascinating because in that reality, there is a necessity that drives that
Yeah.
presence and that knowingness. We've now created really comfortable societies where we no longer have the need to be so present for survival.
Hmm.
I think we have a need now to reconnect with that presence for survival in a different way, for our
Yeah.
soul's survival and for humanity and our planet's survival, right? So how do we make that transition to um, consciously going to that present state, even if it's not out of a risk or immediate life or death threatening situation? Like it's more of a conscious just choice now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question, and you made something kind of click in my brain that a big part of why we've built ourselves outside of nature is for safety and security. And I think it's somewhat ironic that we still live in a pretty fear-based society. And so even though we're outside of nature and we've controlled it relatively well, we still are driven by fear. And that's just a basic psychological response that we have to the unknown. So to answer your question, how do we represent ourselves to the natural world? Um, I think it's a good question. I'm not sure if I have an answer for it, but um, I think a part of what we do in biomimicry and a methodology is we spend time with it. And when we start to look at it from a design lens, we can abstract like, brilliant ideas, asking questions like, why is a flower a certain color? Or what, how does it attract um, organisms to pollinate it? And as you start to really ruminate and think about those ideas, you start to connect with that species and recognize it's living in a context and it's adapting and changing to try and be the best that it can be in that context. That to me is just a psychological way of reconnecting with nature. But then, like I mentioned, the physical connection to nature is what really drives me. So being out in the natural world, and I do it through sport and activity. Like I just find an incredible thrill of dancing with nature. As John says, our friend, we're dancing with nature, but we let nature lead. And that's what I love about mountain biking or whitewater paddling, is that you're in this incredible, you're searching for this euphoric moment where you're riding the wave perfectly, or you hit this, berm perfectly. Um, but at the same time, you recognize that you do anything, even if you have like an egotistical thought, I find I will mess up and land on my head. And it's quite a sobering moment where it's like I'm super present to what just like I'm super present to the natural world, to how small I am, how insignificant I am on this planet. And I mean, those are just two ways that I do it. But it depends. I know people can meditate. People can have plants in their houses. There's many ways to reconnect and
Mhm.
get back to that space.
I think that was really interesting what you said, and I liked how you phrased that nature is always striving to be the best version of itself, right? It's always striving, which in my mind is healthy continuity, like being able
Yeah.
to survive and move forward in as healthy, thriving way as possible, right? And one of the things that I remember learning from your biomimicry workshop weekend was, a tree will not grow 10,000 feet taller than the rest in the forest, because if it grows taller than everything else, it will kill its own ecosystem, and then it itself will die, right? And these are not things that are complex. Like, nature is complex, but it's also, the lessons seem very simple, right? I
Hmm.
mean, those are not things that are really hard to really integrate into our lives. I mean, like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. If I am, taking all the resources for myself, well, then my ecosystem that I rely on to survive will no longer survive, and then therefore I won't survive, right?
Yeah, I think it's awesome because what you're saying too is like it's simple when you think about it, but it may be perceived as complex because it's different than what we're taught. Like in a capitalist economy, it's like the point is to grow, grow as fast and as far as you can. And in an ecosystem, you'll see like um, the canopy's all intact. There isn't, like you said, one tree that's 600 feet above the rest, because being intact, like this is moss wall is kind of um, it looks like a top of a tree canopy,
Oh,
but you can see that if there's a heavy storm or wind that comes and tries to hit this ecosystem, this forest, by having that intact canopy, the wind and all the pressures kind of just gets dissipated and bounced off. It can't actually penetrate into the undergrowth and mess everything up. So it's like a bunch of friends holding hands and locking arms and creating this barrier for the undergrowth to grow and to create more diversity. So yeah, I think there's so many cool lessons in nature, and you're right. It's just about connecting with them and recognizing they may be very different than what we've been brought up to believe or taught.
yeah, and I think it's about reframing, like you said, the conversation now, because we've been so used to pursuing growth as this,
Right.
ever increasing, faster, bigger, more complex kind of process. When in fact, trying to come up with a way forward that
Mm,
works and thrives
yeah.
for all life, I mean, that's complex engineering, right?
Yeah.
Like that is
Totally.
that's an engineering challenge for the next century, that's for sure, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's really considering more and thinking more, obviously what the indigenous always say, 7 generations out, or more, right? But to, even if we think about what that even means, right? That means thinking today in a way, and building today and designing today, for a way that will continue to be sustainable, you
Yeah.
know, 50, 100, 200 years out, hopefully indefinitely. I mean, that would be the goal. And
Yeah.
and when you look at nature, it's something that um, it might be more work on the upfront, but the systems just continue to perpetuate the best versions of themselves because they're
Yes.
driving towards that, right?
Yeah. I think it's a good point that the it's interesting the word sustainability, because nature doesn't sustain anything. It
No.
allows release at all costs.
Hmm.
And that's what I'm really interested in, is sustainability through letting go. It's actually a kind of a counterintuitive that you have to let go of things to be able to be resilient and be sustainable. Nature is constantly adapting at multiple scales. Like if you think of a tree, the branches are moving, they're picking up information and making adaptations, branching in new patterns to be the best for that context. Its bark is changing, its leaves are falling and coming back in new configurations and colors, and the roots are changing. So that whole system is changing constantly
Mhm.
and using information to make that change. And, the contrast to human built environment is our buildings are designed not to change, and they're built to be robust and to ignore the environment and to try and resist the environment, which takes a lot of energy. And the longer we hold on to something beyond its time, the greater the potential for collapse. Like it could be a massive failure
Right.
the more we hold on. And so, yeah, I think in terms of building the future, it's like we got to start with our mindsets, because the buildings, we're not going to tear them all down. It's like, how do we build with a new paradigm, one that can be more sustainable for more people.
Right. Absolutely, and I think that that's it. It's such a fear-driven way of
Yeah,
thinking that I think our society has developed up until now, and change is a scary thing, right? People
yeah,
change; they're afraid of change because there's uncertainty. You don't know where
yeah.
it's going to go. But I think, especially now with what's happening in the world today, we have to start opening ourselves up to change it, and not being so afraid of it. And I really loved your video that you did on the adaptive cycle and how
Hmm.
nature deals with change and releases, and how we might
Hmm.
be able to learn from that. And I think it was a great example. It made me think of it yesterday because we had a massive rain and windstorm that raged through where we are.
Yeah,
And I woke up in the morning and there was just trees like broken down all over the place, everywhere.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the closer I looked at the trees, at first I was like, "Oh my god, this is devastation." And then I looked closer at the trees, and I realized they were all old or dead trees. And so when
yeah,
you look at them, you realize, wow, okay, this is kind of like cleaning house for nature,
yeah.
so that when the springtime comes, there's room for the new green shoots to rise, right? And I just thought that was really beautiful. But how do you think that maybe we can learn from nature and apply that cycle thinking to what we're going through now?
Yeah, so I think in terms of COVID, which is the biggest disruption, worldwide, it's incredible to see how it's shifted our thinking. These are opportunities to just reset, and rethink, what are we doing. Nature's going to force us to change, but if you look at nature, it's not necessarily forced, it's almost proactive, it's constant, it's programmed to change. So I mean, the first thing I did when COVID hit was actually took a vacation. I was supposed to be on vacation anyways, but I took that time to reassess what it is that are my priorities. What are we doing as a company? Um, because I want to make sure that the mindset that I'm using at that time, is going to be something that's productive and worthwhile in the future. And that's what these moments of change provide us, as a reset button. And if you look at the forest that has been knocked down from that windstorm, um, like you said, yeah, that falling of limbs or those breaking of branches is, not only is it allowing new shoots to capture that energy that was once blocked by the canopy, but it's also putting nutrients back into the soil.
Mm.
So what I love about that metaphor is that nature also, the elders and the people who are passing on, also give up and give their nutrients back to the soil for the new energy and the new, organisms to emerge. And that's one thing. Like we're seeing I think we always often see generational divides, like the millennials versus the boomers. There's such a contrast, but how can those boomers give resources, whether it's financial, whether it's like thinking, whether it's about lessons, or mentoring? How do we give back to support the soil for the next generation to really create something? And the cool thing is the millennials, Gen Zs, these people coming up are just wickedly creative. So it's like, if they have the soil to create their ideas, it's going to be unstoppable. And that's the exciting part, is with COVID, people are talking about how do we build back better. And it's like, give it to the young kids, because they're wicked smart. And then my goal is put it along with a natural philosophy, use biomimicry, because we have better evidence that that kind of thinking, or nature's way of doing things, is more sustainable. It's been here way longer than we have as a species, so why not?
Right. Absolutely. I think that's amazing and that's very inspiring. I think the young people and they're grabbing onto these ideas. It's amazing,
Yeah.
like, talking to people. They are
Yeah.
much smarter than all of us, and I just think with these tools, I'm just really excited to see what they can co-create and what we can create, with
Totally.
these new ideas and ways of thinking. And you're right, it is a way of thinking. It's
Yeah.
shifting entirely, and that's why I think that all these conversations about, how can we get back to the way things were, or, rebuild based on where things were. Well, that's gone now, right? And honestly, I'm okay with that, right? I think when you have a system that, let's be honest, just didn't work for
Yeah.
humans or for nature or for any of us, this is an opportunity, as painful as change can be, and as painful as this can be for many people, and for businesses, and all sorts of things that happen in change cycles. I think that there is an opportunity for the green shoots, the young minds and the creative
Hmm.
ideas to start to take form in a completely different way. Because, as Einstein says, you can't, solve the problems with the same thinking that created them, right? And so
Yeah.
you have an opportunity to reset
Totally.
and to come at it from a new way of thinking. And I think this is definitely, the right way of thinking about where we go. So, with that, Jamie, what do you say is the world that you see? Like, what is your idea or your vision of what the world could look like? Let's say, if we implemented all these ideas and biomimicry, and started doing, what could that world look like?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, it's like I can picture people being free in their own creativity and their own intentions, like finding their own purpose, and learning to how to live in integrity with that. Because I know a lot of people who may have worked jobs that they're just like not aligned with, that they're just kind of doing it because it's a job, and I respect that. But also in the world that I live, it's like I want to see people lit up. I want to see people inspired, creating from a new source of innovation and inspiration. So that's the first part. But then you know what I see physically and what that translates to is a system that's in harmony with nature. That's my utopia. That's where I want to go. Is if you look at the world today, there's a very glaring contrast between us and the natural world. We've built cities as great kind of uh, almost like temples outside of nature, and it's like we push nature out. And my whole goal with the consulting company is like, how do we reintegrate nature back into our cities, in a way that works for both us and nature? How do we get back to that place where we used to all be? We all came from, we came from nature, and we came from building harmony with nature and finding ways to work together. There is symbiotic relationship. So that's the two kind of that's the fourth that I'm trying to like see in the future, is people lit up and creating systems that are in harmony with the natural world.
And I actually think that's such a beautiful reminder to people, because, as you say on your website, the way you think is the way you're going to create, right? So
Yeah,
where your creation comes from within, and it comes
yeah,
from the way you're thinking, the way you're feeling, your intention that you're putting into it. And so really it does start from here. It does start from your heart,
yeah,
from your center, from your passion, from your creativity. And so by allowing that to flourish in people, then all of a sudden imagine what that result would be, right? So
right,
what I think we're trying to do is we're trying to create solutions from the outside in rather than from the inside out. And it's
yeah,
just never going to happen because we're doing it from limited thinking, right? So I really love that. If we can foster the creativity and the imagination and
yeah.
innovation in people, then imagine where we could go.
Yeah, and I mean, just think of like times in your life when you've created something with no barriers and no boundaries, and nobody told you to create it. It's like it has a different feel, and there's a different sense of pride to it
Mhm.
than if somebody from the top down tells you you've got to make this report or you've got to do this. It's like, well, I'll do it, but man, was that art project way more fun, and something I want to pass on to my kids. There's a different feeling, a different vibration in that creation.
Yeah. Well, everything is energy. And so
Yeah,
the
exactly.
better
Yeah,
energy we can put into something, the better the results will be.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Well, thank you very much, Jamie. That was awesome. And I love your insights, as always, just so inspiring. And
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was great to connect.
great.